You've done both sides. You've come from agency side and then went to client side. What are some of the key learnings?
It's quite hard to move from agency side to client side, and it really shouldn't be. And I think the long-term relationship build isn't prioritised as much on both sides as it used to be, and therefore maybe we're not understanding each other as well.
Which I think is dangerous.
I think there's a lot of mistruths I think we have in advertising. We think that to do great work is really, really hard and really exhausting, and it's hard to do great work. I think it's easier to do great work than it is to do average work. The precursor to doing great work is to have a great relationship. You cannot do great work without the great relationship. Get the relationship right and the rest will follow. Your clients buy emotionally. They don't buy the charts, they buy you.
Do you think agencies are asking the right questions?
I know that they are.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Courageous Leaders podcast. I am your host, Joanna Howes, and on today's episode, we have the fantastic James Hayhurst, founder of the Magic Source program and the Parents Promise. He is an ex-agency and client-side leader and an advocate for children's rights. So let's get started. Hello, James. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I'd love to kick off straight away. Big question. What does courageous leadership mean to you?
The question, right. Okay, from an exam question, I suppose. I'm not saying I necessarily portray or have portrayed any of these characteristics, but I suppose good leadership is really about getting something done. So meeting an objective, moving people from one place to the other and bringing them with you, hopefully willingly.
Yeah.
Then the word courageous, I suppose, indicates when it's more difficult. So I suppose being true to what you believe in and sort of doing what's right, even when it's difficult or when no one's looking, making tough calls, sticking with stuff for the long term, I would say as well. And often just making decisions. There's quite a lot I'm sure we'll come onto in marketing. Well, we actually don't really have that many courageous decisions to make. But we make them seem like they're bigger than they are. It's not how heart surgery or brain surgery or anything like that. So, and then I tried to think about courageous leaders in the real world. And I didn't come up with too many, but I've tried to think of a couple. From someone in the world of football, for any football fans listening, someone like, I'm not an Arsenal fan, like Mikel Arteta.
Okay, yeah.
Who's clearly got a plan, had to deal with lots of muppets saying he was rubbish, like, Piers Morgan. And stuck with it and made tough decisions, got rid of arguably his best striker, and we're seeing the results. I think that's quite good. And I also thought Joe Wicks might be quite interesting in that he didn't lead anyone to begin with, because he was, he turned up on his own and no one turned up, but just he kept going with a faith that this would work out in the long term. And he's also I know he's some people, but I think he's just very authentic.
Yeah.
And then my final piece of homework, I thought maybe politically, which is even probably the hardest area to find a good leader. Maybe someone like Rory Stewart, again, I think that was a quote from my BMP training, I remember, from Burnback. A principle isn't a principle till it costs you something. So obviously he's someone who has a set of values. He knows what he thinks conservatism is, and he was happy to leave the party, not happy, but did leave the party when it got difficult, and he didn't feel that he could do it, serve with good conscience. So there, my three examples.
Really good examples. Yep. And I think it's really nice. What I've taken from that is that the courage to have self-belief and back yourself, the courage to be persistent and keep showing up, even when maybe, and I know that a lot of people will say, oh, just give up, don't do this, but the courage to keep trusting your own inner belief that this is possible, and then to stand by what you believe in.
Yep.
And actually, you say the courage of conviction. You don't just say that's a principle, you do something with it, you actually stick with it. And I think that sums up lovely. What I'm going to pick you up on though, James, is you said that you're going to share stuff, but then these aren't necessarily the things you're doing.
Well, some of them I think I'm doing, but it's always thinking. I was listening to, obviously, to the podcast. I definitely didn't do all of those things, or haven't done all of the things all the time, for sure. So,
which one do you think for you was quite present in your leadership that really helped you?
Probably determination and to keep going. Probably harder in a corporate organisation I wouldn't say as a massive change maker, but I think there's a quiet determination in what I've done. Certainly more recently, that's probably how I lead. I'm kind of leading a bit by example, I suppose. I'm naturally quite an introvert. I think I've grown into leadership, if that's even a thing, as I've kind of got older. But that's probably the main thing. I suppose I just think courageous leadership's generally characterised as being quite extrovert or kind of making tough calls. I'm just not sure how many tough calls I had to make in advertising.
Had to do it,
Yeah, so.
I'm guessing as we go down, there's probably been some tougher calls or recently in some of the decisions you've made and what you're doing.
Yeah, potentially.
We can get to.
We'll see if that's the case, yeah.
And I'd love to, going to your story, what, I really wanted to interview on the show is you've done both sides. You've come from agency side and then went to client side. We'll dig into why that was. But first of all, just share with the audience, what are the key differences you noticed about working agency and client? What are some of the key learnings?
Oh, good question. I only worked at one client. So I worked at Unilever and I only worked at 2 agencies. I'm obviously very loyal. So I worked at DDB and there was MD at Lagos. An anomaly actually, it's quite hard to move from agency side to client side. And it really shouldn't be. I got very lucky when I, ironically, given Unilever overtest everything, I got the job on one phone call, incredibly. So I think, what's the difference? I think the culture's different. I think, agencies are brilliant. Oh, they're brilliant, but they're certainly brilliant when you're in your 20s and early 30s. They're brilliant before kids.
Yeah.
And obviously, agency culture's changed a lot. I started in the kind of early 2000s. Client culture, it's bigger. So the one thing that really stuck out to me was, and it's a big part of what I talk about when I do my training with agencies, is the power of the KPI.
Okay.
So agencies generally, you're judged on how you show up day to day because that's what we can see. And they're kind of generally, even big agencies are only in a few hundred. So everyone's got a good look at kind of what you like. So it's less about maybe you didn't win that pitch, but you're good at what you do and that's kind of shines through. The big learning I had client side is if you're in a massive organization, everyone has KPIs that are incredibly pointy, very numeric, end up on a spreadsheet at the end of the year with quite brutal calibrations. And that's how an organization drives forward. And maybe that's one of the things I didn't appreciate being an agency person, which I now do, is there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes in the client world that you need to know if you're working with your clients, I think.
Yeah. Do you think agencies are asking the right questions to find this stuff out?
No, I don't think they are. I don't think they know to ask. Some people clearly do. And also, I just think we've got a couple of things. I think everyone's busier. Mm-hmm. I think the way that agencies are remunerated generally has gone more project-based, which means a lot of the time that you would have had just to build relationships naturally, it's become more transactional. So it's kind of do a project and get out of doing a project a little bit. And I think the long-term relationship build isn't prioritised as much on both sides as it used to be. And therefore, maybe we're not understanding each other as well, I'd say.
Which I think is dangerous.
Yes. It makes it harder. It makes it harder.
A lot harder. Yeah. And I reckon cost a lot more money and take more time ultimately. Even though we think probably it should be quicker, it's not.
Oh, definitely. So, I think there's a triple win of a strong relationship, which is, it's more efficient. You can actually just cut to the chase. I think there's a lot of, I won't call them lies, a lot of mistruths I think we have in advertising. We think that to do great work is really, really hard and really exhausting. And it's hard to do great work. I think it's easier to do great work than it is to do average work. I only did great work a couple of times and I've done quite a lot of average work. And it's easier to do great work because the precursor to doing great work is to have a great relationship. You cannot do great work without the great relationship.
Yeah.
And often I think we start in the wrong place. I think we start on, let's get the work right. But what we need to do is get the relationship right first.
Yeah, you just made me think. I was working with a leadership team last week in terms of just being able to give each other feedback. And one big insight that came out was like, actually, we haven't formed the relationship needed to be able to do this. And actually, if we had the relationship first, be able to give you feedback would probably take 5 minutes. Yep. Because I don't know you very well.
Dance around, don't you?
I'm dancing around it, not sure how you're going to react, mind reading your response. So so just prioritise that relationship building again. And unfortunately, as you said, all I keep hearing at the moment is we're too busy, don't have time. And I think it's actually a very dangerous, busy culture that we're...
Hugely so, there was a very good piece of advice that I wouldn't say I ignored it, I just didn't realise how right it was. So one of my first ever bosses and mentor of mine to this day, Karen Buchanan,
she's been on here.
She's been on here, and she says, get the relationship right and the rest will follow. And that, to sum up the program I give now in the Magic Sauce, that is basically it. And if you start there, there's loads of theory which no doubt we can dig into, that everything else is easier because you say you've got the foundation upon which you can have better conversations. So you get better briefs, you get better work, you can do stuff more quickly. So they're more efficient, the relationships, they're more effective, you get better work. The big driver for me is they're more enjoyable.
Yeah.
There are so many people particularly agency side, that are scared of their clients, and they've not got the right psychological safety because we've not even talked about that as a thing, and therefore they're not enjoying their jobs. And a big part of what I try and do is say, your client is just like you, except they went out of a different door at uni, and the things they're worried about, actually, if you sit down, they're probably the same things that you're worried about. Can we do something really good on time and on budget? And if you can see that you are actually on the same team versus how we normally see it as two sides, you've got to get something through and that kind of stuff, then it fundamentally changes things.
I know it is, and it's just like you, is a lot of the stuff I talk about is, I think they're just another human.
Yeah.
So it's like they have the fear of failure, they have the fear of not being worthy, not being good enough, looking stupid, fear of rejection. We all have those same fears as well, alongside actually just really wanting to do great work and look good.
And the other thing that I didn't realise until I became one is clients are vulnerable. Because you always think agency side, okay, well, it's the clients that hire and fire you, and there's we get fairly sort of browbeaten, I think, as to who needs agencies and get clients rewriting our work and what have you. But when you go the other side, it's classic trusted advisor stuff. Is I now can't do the thing. So if I've got a really senior meeting coming up on Friday, I need my agency to deliver for me. So I choose them because I know they can do the job, but also I trust them to deliver. And there was some real irony. I only really realised how important my role was, not necessarily my role, but the role of account leadership or whatever, when I became a client. I was like, oh yes, like the person that I had very good agencies when I was at Unilever, the person that ran those accounts, or the key people, they were that business.
Yeah.
And there was an understanding that was quite.
And that ability to build that trust, and that they're going to help you do your job.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're going to deliver what I need. They'll bring the right people from the organisation. They'll make it palatable, and they'll make it right sized for a Unilever.
Yeah. You're not sitting there with your fingers crossed, just hoping.
No, exactly.
Because you're next on the line.
Yeah, that relationship doesn't last very long.
Yeah, I'd not thought of that, how vulnerable the client is. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. So I like that you've taken us through the different sides. Yes. Why did you choose to go client side?
I think I'd always fancied client side, I must say. I'd always been intrigued as to what it would be like, and the things that I thought would be interesting were, I'm going to sound like a megalomaniac, control. So even when you have a great relationship agency side, you can only do your bit. So I thought it'd be nice, do you know what, it might just to decide something and then do the whole thing. So there was that. There was, could I do it? Could I be a good client? Because surely it's easy, because because there's all these clients that don't buy the work that we think's right, so that'd be interesting. And then the final one, which is actually the critical one, which is going to sound bad now, it makes it sound like I'm lazy, was work-life balance. And as I'm sure we'll come on to with the Parents' Promise, I had a very unexpected life change when I was managing director at Lagos, in the shape of a kind of divorce. And again, with great irony, given what happened subsequently, I suddenly realised I couldn't be working agency MD hours. I needed to be able to pick my daughter up from school when I was able to, as in, when it was, in terms of my time with her, I couldn't be pitching. And it was actually, it was a really positive move. I got very lucky. I'd never worked on Unilever. I knew nothing about Unilever, but Alini Santos, who hired me, wanted an agency person, and that was the kind of catalyst. It's one of those things, obviously good coming from a less good situation. So that was the reason I did it.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you're happy to share.
Yeah.
I've been through a divorce myself. Yeah. Just curious in terms of, I know it shaped me quite a bit as a person, and then how I saw the world and it evolved. How do you think it? That was quite a big change, going from agency to client, going from being married to not married. How was that shift in your life? How did it change you, or how you started to see the world differently?
Oh, there's probably a couple of things there. The first thing, actually, a good point, is you can't change everything at once. I remember thinking, because it was really busy at the agency, and it was in that sense unsustainable for too long. But I knew if I was to, who knows if I got the job. If I was to change my job as well as all of the turmoil, it would have been too much. I did consciously say I need to breathe for 6-9 months and then see. So that was the kind of first thing. In terms of how it changed me, I suppose again, there's phases. You never think you're going to get divorced. There's quite a lot of shame. So I was like, wow, this happens to people on telly, and there's a huge kind of feeling of failure. And then I suppose probably going to get onto the stuff about why I set up the Parents' Promise. But then then it was how can you make good about it? You reprioritize.
Yeah.
It takes whoever does, whatever happens, it takes two for a marriage to fail. And I was working too hard probably. Or do you suddenly go, what's important? Like, what is important? Well, seeing my daughter's more important than all the other things. So that was, I don't know, I think I've come out of it a better person or more rounded person, or my priorities change in the right way. I don't know.
Seeing it when like the trauma in your life actually can just reset.
Yeah.
And sometimes you wish that reset had happened before the trauma have to happen, but it happens and you just, I don't know, we can wake up a little bit and what am I doing in my life? Is this what I want to be doing? And you just said that big question, what's important?
It just forced it, because otherwise, maybe I'd be totally happy and it'd be wonderful. But, now, I have a daughter that was 15 years ago nearly, or no, 12. But I was on this track the same track. Yeah. And it's been more interesting, I think.
Yeah, more varied.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the parents' promise a couple of times. I'd love to know a bit more about where that came from and just to help us understand what it is.
Yeah, for sure. So so it's, I suppose it's a kind of therapy project, I suppose, for me at its base. But as I was going through, and I won't get into all the details, but basically the process of divorce and then family court, sadly, and all of that stuff, I became aware of an issue which I'd only had, to use advertising terminology, I had awareness of it, but zero relevance, because I never thought it'd happen to me. And I thought that those generally dads who dressed up as Batman must have done something, because I thought in the UK broadly stuff worked. I'd gone to a state school, I'd had operations on the NHS. I thought everything in society worked okay. And I was like, oh wow, this doesn't work. There was a real role for communication, I thought and still think, is that it's an issue which is so toxic. And you've got people like Fathers for Justice on one side, you've got Women's Aid on the other side, and at the fringes, it's very similar to what we see post-COVID with social media. They're talking past each other, and there's a real problem that essentially lots of parents after separation may not see a child through no fault of their own, and you go, wow, how is that even a thing? So that's the kind of the backdrop, and I observed that lots of Google searches late at night, people know this, and nothing changes because it's too toxic for politicians to deal with, and everyone tries to change it in a kind of legislative way, which is really slow. So I thought, let's put 15 years of dubious morals and ethics in advertising to good use. There's a role for comms here. Can we start a conversation which is balanced? And could we create something that was almost impossible to argue with? So the parents' promise it's a prenup. It's a PR conceit, although it's going to start to be used by people. It's going to start to be used by law firms potentially. But the idea is, and we'll obviously put the website in the show notes, but it's called theparentspromise.org.uk is where you'll find it. And it's you can download a promise, which is three things that you and your partner would make to each other. It's not in front of the children, but the point is you go, while things are good, then let's agree that if things change, then we will always essentially agree that the children see lots of us and our wider family, that we will always be nice to each other, for want of better phraseology, and then we'll work together to create the conditions for our kids to thrive. So that's the idea. And then we launched it with a survey. So we discovered that 95% of us parents have actually discussed what we do if we win the lottery, which of course will never happen, but less than 5% have ever talked about separation. And it's just this national experiment in cognitive dissonance. And of course, we don't talk about it because it's difficult. Yeah. But if we can frame it when times are good, then it's really important. So that's kind of where that came from. And then the idea then was, I suppose linking to leadership, is would it be possible to bring together a group of organisations and individuals that are in the centre, and there's loads of them, to support this idea. So there's about 25 now. The most prominent will be people like Place to Be, so the kids' mental health charity, the Children's Mental Health Week, and Relate, and then lots of other Asian single parents network. It's a really, really good group. So they were the two foundations. And then we did a project last year, which Rory Sutherland helped us launch in Parliament, which was to change. We try and act like a brand and try and make a difference in culture once every year or so. So last year, I just observed that Lagos Delaney were great with me when I was going through my separation, and Unilever were great. but neither had a set policy. And it felt like, given HR had moved forward so much and there was policies for lots of really important things, there wasn't one for separation. So that was the idea. So we created an initiative, and we got an MP called Siobhan Bailey to support us, and we got 8 really big companies to change their HR policy and recognise separation as a life event. So we had Tesco, Asda, Vodafone, Unilever. We had some biggies,
Amazing.
which is good. And then next year we're going to do something in schools. So watch this space.
Look, firstly, congratulations. Really congratulations, because, and I'll admit, I have been that person who sits on the sofa going, oh, that needs to be fixed. Yeah. Do I do anything about it? Or wouldn't it be nice to get involved in that? And you don't, you just carry on in your busy life. Courage it took from you, or that real, what was it in you that actually went, I'm going to do something about this? Because I'm guessing this has taken up quite a bit of your time.
I think to begin with, it was anger. I think it was an anger and just a drive to make a difference. I think when I look back, generally things have been pretty fine in my life, but when there's been a setback, I'm quite principled, and I'll go, okay, let's try and make this better somehow. I'll take it away and work out how to make it better. So it was sort of that, really. And I think my friends, they're very supportive. I think they thought it was a bit odd that I kept going on about, we're going to do this thing. And so it was that. And then it took time. But I think there's that, I don't know whose quote it is, but the quote that we overestimate what we can do in a year, but underestimate what we can do in 10 plus. And I probably started having these conversations in 2014, 15. And over time, I just met more and more people, which was nice in itself and probably quite therapeutic. And it seemed to chime with people when I said, look, because when I was meeting journalists, the first thing they think is Fathers for Justice. And I'd say, look, imagine Fathers for Justice. Imagine that as far away as you can get from that. So it's not angry, it's balanced, and it's trying to make a difference. And then people got on side. So I think, and then I don't know what it was really. I suppose probably a lack of agency. The system doesn't work, and it allowed me to have an outlet to make a difference, because I couldn't make a difference anywhere else. Yeah. If that makes sense.
No, it does. And it just sounds fantastic. And, and I know a lot of this is, to help your daughter, and so you can see your daughter. Are you happy to share the experience with your daughter? I know she has autism.
Oh, my other daughter.
The other daughter.
Oh, right.
There's another daughter with the autism. What's been the impact of, your experience as a father there in terms of then how you live?
Oh God, yeah. So I've got another daughter on the way as well in about 2 weeks' time. So I'm going to be doing. Yeah. So I'm looking for a plug and play one, which is So we have a beautiful 6-year-old called Jessica, who is, and this was a big thing to process, I suppose, over the last few years. Is non-verbal autism, severe autism, essentially. So it's a journey you never think you're going to go on. I mean, obviously I never thought it was going to get divorced, but as far as we could tell, our child was developing neurotypically, and then just something happened, and we're like, she doesn't seem to be looking at us, and this is 18 months old, and nobody can tell you where it will go. So firstly, it's hard to get a diagnosis, but we got one. But then you don't really know. I mean, I thought, autistic people, showing my naivety, sort of just coded for Google, and there's a massive spectrum, and I think that's something that's not appreciated. I certainly didn't appreciate it. There's a really wonderful program on the BBC, Inside Our Autistic Minds by Chris Packham, which just starts to show, what non-verbal autistic people are like. And they're all, once you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. They're very, very different. But what impact has it had? Well, I suppose practically, again, the positive maybe is it led me to do my own thing.
Okay.
So post Unilever, I was at a scale up, which didn't scale in COVID.
Okay.
So I was, and I remember thinking, I can't get a proper job for at least a few months because there are no jobs. But then I realised that if I could make my own thing work, I had a bit of coaching before I knew UJ. So it was coaching with you, but I had a couple of sessions with the next client of mine, and it was just, a classic tick box column. And I realised that if I could make my own thing work, this is where the two stories intertwine. It meant I could launch The Parents' Promise, because I'd done it on the side, and it was fine to do it on the side because it was, a little bit of time around my job. But to launch it was for a couple of months was going to be quite a lot of work. So that was a tick. And then with Jessica's needs, we weren't sure of them, but I was pretty sure that, me going to Vietnam for 2 weeks, like I would do at Unilever, it's not going to be the right thing to do. Yeah. So it switched my decision making to, could I try and do my own thing?
Yeah.
And there was a bit of serendipity from meeting various people who thought about, who actually planted a seed of maybe I could do a training course. Yeah. And then a bit of inspiration I know your husband's working behind the scenes here, from my wife, who runs her own PR agency. And I would never have done my own thing if I'd not seen her do that as well. So it's a whole mix of stuff.
There's lots of different courageous moments you've had, making that jump from agency to client, setting up the parents' promise when most people will just sit back on the sofa and not respond to an emotion or something that needs to get fixed. The courage to, lean into your daughter's autism and help her and go through that journey. And then setting up Magic Source program alongside all the other things you're doing in the background to help. You're a very busy man.
I suppose, I've read quite a lot of stoicism over the last few years. Yeah, and there's that quote, the obstacle is the way. And just sort of going, okay, well, it makes you do, client side was, I loved Unilever, and I was much, at that time of my life, it was a brilliant move. I think I love my agency time. Once you get to kind of mid-30s with kids, for me, I'm too tired, I need to go to bed. So Unilever was brilliant then, so that was a good experience. I always try and think, okay, how can this work out? Or what's been shown here, or how can I make this work out for the better, I suppose, if I can. It's easier said than done.
And I was going to say, because you mentioned at the beginning, more of an introvert. How is it? Because I'm an introvert, learned extrovert when I need to be. So I'm always very curious when people go on doing their own thing as an introvert, and it's like, you've gone on and met so many people and connected with so many people. What has it taken from you to do your own thing, being more naturally introverted? So
I may not be properly profiled. You may now tell me that I'm actually an extrovert. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I've always I like one-to-one. I've always liked one-to-one conversation. So I think this is my own sort of diagnosis of being an introvert. So I don't like being the centre of attention, really. And I don't like rooms with loads of people. Mm-hmm. But speaking to people like this, without the cameras, one-on-one is really nice. I suppose I'm always quietly confident, I think, maybe. And I built the Magic Source from my own experience of what agency people need to learn about clients and vice versa, and how we can work better together. But the reason it's any good at all, I think, is because I've interviewed about 140 people now, both sides from my network. So sometimes I'll get people will say you need to speak to this person, but generally I know them first.
That's brilliant.
And as you were saying earlier, you make great friendships as well, and
the connections,
you learn loads of stuff. So
what would you say? We say like one, maybe 3 key things that came out of that 140 interviews you've done that really stood out for you. Back to
Karen's quote, and this is get the relationship right, the rest will follow. And it's just interesting because I think, the press, there's always seems to be like, we'll obviously just come back from Cannes this year and it's AI. There's always a whizzy tool that we're all obsessed around. Yet when I interviewed all these people, I would say, and then one of the questions is, when you've done great work, that works. I'm not talking about stuff that's won an award, but the work for your business, what were the key ingredients of that? And 95% say chemistry, trust, teamwork. And that was the huge opportunity I saw. And I saw it client side is nobody talks about this. Well, we do. I know there's annual assessment stuff, but there aren't people, certainly client side, worried about how good their relationship is with Ogilvy or BBH in a way that I think they should be. Not because Ogilvy and BBH are unhappy, but if they are unhappy, that's a really important sign.
Yeah.
So the big one is, get the relationship right, the rest will follow. Then I suppose what comes from that. So this, as you said, you just have better conversations.
Yeah.
So I pieced everything together, and then obviously I then found out someone had done it before in a much better way. And there's a book about it. But I read the 5 dysfunctions of team. Yes. Yeah.
Patrick Lees. I can never say that name right.
And his point. So how I worked it out is, as you said, if you like each other, it's easier to disagree.
Yep.
And if you set the right relationship dynamics, you then, because when clients talk about when the agencies are great, they always talk about constructive challenge. But if a default of clients when it gets stressy, not all clients clearly, but it's like goes to supply and demand, and please do that, and then the agency doesn't do what you need it to do, and you end up with the kind of tailspin. But so get the power dynamics right, and then you can commit to stuff, and you can make stuff happen and be accountable. And that's what he's got in his pyramid. The bottom of it is trust, or absence of trust. Isn't there? If there's no trust, there's no
chance.
There's no and seeing conflict. Conflict. He talks about conflict. I'm not sure it's the right word, but what is it? Creative discussion or challenge or questioning?
No, I think he does call it.
He calls it conflict.
Yeah, because I'm just reading his book called The Advantage, which sums up some of that book. And he's saying, that he starts again with the ability to trust, but the ability to have conflict.
Exactly.
And they say if trust isn't there, that conflict can't go. And that whole thing of how we see conflict, and that conflict actually is really healthy. Yeah. And I think some people can do it quite well and then go for a drink afterwards. Other people, it just destroys them.
Yeah, exactly.
They take it so personally. Yeah. And I think to build that inner confidence up, to see actually, no, we can go and have a bit of a storm and still be mates.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's the point. And again, that comes out from most of the people I talk to. So they're probably, and then this point, that the sort of trusted advisor thinking that I think agencies, there are a couple of things that agencies, looking at myself, that maybe we talk to people about with regards to consumers, but we forget about clients. The first one is, it's about emotional connection. So, and everywhere in all the awards, it's like this ad connects emotionally. Yeah, your clients buy emotionally. Yeah. They don't buy the charts. They buy you, and it's easier to do that. And I didn't think I doubled down enough on the relationship. And the same with organic growth. Yeah, you've got to brands grow by being seen. Yeah, and it can being in your clients' offices and all that kind of stuff. So I suppose they were the kind of maybe the big things.
That's really helped you form to train and support people to do those things.
Yes, yeah,
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
James, your journey is amazing. Everything you've experienced and where it's landing. The Magic Sauce is absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend everyone go and check it out. I love your website. I think it's brilliant. I think it's so clever. Your branding, I think it's brilliant. I'd love to know, what advice would you pass on to your younger self with the journey you've been on?
I think one of them would be enjoy it. I remember at the start of BNP grad training, someone who would have been in their mid-30s, but would have seemed old at the time, which is, it's not a race. And I think you kind of, that was probably one of the big things about the failures I've had since 30s, with everything kind of going wrong in certain areas of my life, is you just enjoy the journey. Because there tends to be, and I think, I was lucky enough to work with Sir Ken Robinson at Unilever, who talks a lot about how the education system's broken. I do feel that we, certainly in London, it's all about grade chasing and overachievement, and that doesn't lead to a happy life, because where do you get to the end of all the A's and all that? You end up at the top of some ladder that you don't want to be on. Yeah. So enjoy the journey, I think, would be one thing. I think the other one would be a bit more confident in what you know. Often we sometimes talk about imposter syndrome, and I wasn't aware I had imposter syndrome. And I don't think, but now I look back, it was kind of perfectionist syndrome. Right. And it was only, I can do this as long as I'm really, really, really well prepared. And it was only when I got a couple of years in at Unilever that, again, with all due respect to Unilever people, I realised that they didn't know what they were talking about either. Okay. And sort of understand that you kind of maybe know a little bit more. And certainly when I look at more junior people, we're obsessed with, probably unhealthily, by what the youngsters think. Yeah. So I look at, junior account execs in meetings. I would have been too shy to speak to the senior guy at British Gas or whatever, but they really want to know what you're thinking. And that's something I like to do with my courses, kind of do swaps and do kind of coffee exchanges. So they'd be the things. Enjoy it, understand what you know, and just be you, be more human, be yourself, because that's how you connect, really, the power of connection.
And it's so hard that's so hard for people to do.
Because they feel they can't.
Got to wear a mask. Thank you so much. Is there any final words, anything you'd like to share before we close?
No, just, thank you for having me. Depending on, there is our education survey for our next project, maybe something you can put in the show notes, because if there's any parents of separated parents, we're after some insights. There's a little survey monkey I can maybe pop in show notes. But apart from that, just thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody listening, and we'll see you next week. If you've been loving our Courageous Leaders podcast, please can I ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the quality content coming and reach listeners like you that we can then really, really help. We fund this podcast ourselves, so to have your support means that we can keep delivering week on week. Thank you.